Welcome back to Q&A Modeling Bootcamp. In the last lesson, I introduced you to phrasings and how they can be used to reduce ambiguity and define new terms in your model. This time, I'll be showing you a handful of more advanced properties of the linguistic schema that you may find useful. The first such property is when. Each relationship can optionally have a date associated with it, which describes when that relationship took place. For example, orders are shipped to customers on ship dates. This enables questions such as, when were orders shipped to John, which orders were shipped in the past 3 weeks, and how many orders were shipped on December 24, 2014. Without setting this property, Q&A will still recognize dates, but it will have to make its best guess as to which date you're referring to. For example, in the case of how many orders were shipped last week, it may end up using the order date rather than the ship date. Much like the when property, each relationship can optionally have a location associated with it, which describes where that relationship takes place. For example, customers buy products in stores. This enables questions such as, where did John buy cheese? And how many customers bought wine in store 6? Much like dates, Q&A will try to make its best guess when the property is not set, but setting it can help eliminate ambiguity. Up until now, I've been using the terms phrasing and relationship more or less synonymously, but that's actually not the case. Relationships are a distinct concept in the linguistic schema. A relationship object represents a real-world relationship between entities in your model. The when and where properties, the filter condition, which I showed on simple adjective and noun phrasings, and a binding to the join table that embodies instances of the relationship. These are all properties of the relationship object, not the phrasing object. The phrasing itself is a template for how that relationship can be described in language, and each relationship can have multiple phrasings that describe it. So, a full example of a relationship would look something like this. There exists a sale relationship between the entities employee, customer, product, and order date. Instances of that relationship are represented in rows in the order details table. That's the binding. The relationship occurs on the order date, that's the when, and there are 2 primary ways of describing this relationship. Employees sell customers products, and customers buy products from employees. Entities in your model participate in relationships by filling roles in that relationship. For example, the sale relationship has 5 entities filling 5 roles: employee, customer, product, order date, and number bought. The pay relationship has 2 entities filling 3 different roles. There's the source account and the destination account, both of which are filled by the account entity, and the amount that was transferred. Each of these roles has a number of optional properties to control the behavior of Q&A for that role. The first such property is the quantity of the role. This indicates how many of that entity participate in the relationship. So for example, I may want to be able to ask, how many chairs did John buy, and get the sum of the number bought column, rather than a count of the different products named chair bought by John. To do this, I would set the quantity property on the product role of the sale relationship to be the number bought entity. There's also an amount role property, used to indicate how much of an entity, as opposed to how many, participates in the relationship. This would be used to enable questions such as, how much water flowed through the dam last week? The third property on roles is role nouns. These are terms which you can use to refer to the entity in the context of their relationship. For example, in the relationship people make movies, you may want to refer to those people as directors, so you can ask questions like, who is the director that made Gone with the Wind? Or even simply, list the directors, which would then return a list of people who made at least one movie. Another type of object within the linguistic schema is the global substitution. These are simple textual replacements you can use in cases where there exists no phrasing type to cover the particular kind of language you're trying to use for some of your questions. For example, you may want to be able to ask something like, how do you make a Shirley Temple? Since Q&A won't know in this case what to do with the pronoun you, The closest you can get is asking for the recipe for a Shirley Temple. A global substitution can instruct Q&A to perform this replacement automatically, converting "how do you make" into "recipe for." Be careful, however, as global substitutions can have unintended consequences. For example, replacing "we have in" with "live in" has a good effect on "how many customers do we have in Seattle," but a rather unfortunate one on "how many customers did we have in each year." The last feature of the linguistic schema I want to teach you about today is the dynamic improvement property. This property controls how Q&A automatically generates objects in the linguistic schema, including entities, synonyms, relationships, and phrasings. Dynamic improvement is normally set to high confidence, which restricts automatically generated objects and synonyms to those which Q&A is confident are valid. If you set it to none, you are taking complete control over the content of the linguistic schema by turning off auto-generation completely, ensuring that your model will be unaffected by changes or improvements that occur from time to time in Q&A's auto-generation heuristics. At the other extreme, if you set dynamic improvement to full, this will instruct Q&A's auto-generation heuristics to be aggressive about adding synonyms and phrasings that seem at least somewhat plausible for the model. Note that this is the default mode if you have never added synonyms or otherwise modified the linguistic schema in your model. There's one additional feature of Q&A that requires some linguistic modeling but isn't part of the linguistic schema itself. You can mark report pages and visuals to be recognized by Q&A in much the same way you add synonyms to tables and columns. Any filters on them that are marked as require single selection are effectively treated as parameters. So if you have a sales summary page with an employee name filter, you would be able to ask questions like, "Show the sales summary for E. Rigby," or even, "Show the sales summary for E. Rigby for 2016, since Q&A will recognize and apply other filters beyond just the parameters. This feature is most useful for cases where you have a complex concept or related set of visuals that your users commonly refer to, but that don't map directly to a single database object. Note that there's currently no way to add phrasings for this type of entity, so Q&A can't be taught to recognize questions like, "What were the net results shown by each product last year?" So for our fifth exercise, we're going to pick up where we left off last time. We'll add a when to one relationship, a where to another, and add a quantity to a role on one of those relationships. Then we'll add synonyms to a report page or visual to enable it for Q&A, and, as always, the most important step, keeping that test questions list up to date.